What if the past is not as final as we believed? What if a man we buried in our hearts long ago was never truly gone? Imagine the shock of seeing a familiar face at the gates of Downton Abbey, a face that belongs to someone the world swore was lost. Forever, he returns not with quiet footsteps, but with the weight of secrets that could shatter the very walls of the estate. Why now? Why after all this time? That is the question that grips us today. The halls of Downton Abbey have always been filled with whispers of triumph and sorrow. Every room carries memories, every portrait tells a story, and among them is the shadow of a man believed to be gone forever. His absence was not just the silence of a missing soul, it was the echo of grief that touched every corner of the great house. When he lived among them, he was more than just a figure of wealth and status. He was the one who carried pride and promise into every gathering. The servants spoke of his charm. The family admired his determination, and even those who envied him could not deny the strength of his presence. But as with all stories of fortune and nobility, fate is never kind for long. The day of his supposed death fell like a dark curtain over Downton Abbey. Rumors swirled faster than the truth could stand. Some said it was an accident, others whispered of betrayal, and still more believed destiny itself had claimed him. No matter the cause, one fact seemed undeniable: he was gone. The carriages rolled through the gates carrying mourners, the bells tolled in sorrow, and for a time it felt as though the estate itself had stopped breathing. For the family, his loss was not only personal, but deeply tied to the future of Downton. His role in the inheritance, his part in guiding the estate, his voice in the decisions that shaped their lives, all of it vanished overnight. The Earl's shoulders grew heavier, the Countess's heart more fragile. The daughters faced a world that seemed to shift beneath their feet. And in the servants' quarters, his absence was discussed in hushed tones as though speaking too loudly might summon his ghost. The community around Downton felt it too. Villagers who had once seen him ride past with a wave now walked with lowered heads at the mention of his name. They carried the story of his passing like a heavy stone, passing it from one generation to the next. He became more than a man. He became a legend of loss, a reminder that even those who seemed untouchable could be swept away. Time passed, as it always does. Downton healed on the surface, but scars remained. Beneath the polished dinners and glittering dances there lingered an unspoken pain. His memory haunted the estate, not with fear, but with longing. As seasons changed and years unfolded, the world began to accept that his story had ended, that his chapter was closed. The Abbey moved forward, yet it never truly forgot, but fate has a cruel way of circling back. When the world convinces itself of one truth, it often prepares to deliver another. And so the man who had vanished into silence, the man thought to be buried by time, is about to return. His reappearance will not simply reopen old wounds, it will cut deeper than ever before, raising a single haunting question. Why now? It begins on a quiet morning at Downton Abbey. The sun rises in its usual golden hue, spilling across the lawns and climbing over the ancient stone walls. The house awakens in the rhythm it has always known. Footsteps in the servants, quarters' voices drifting in the halls, the clatter of silver in preparation for breakfast. Life at Downton appears steady, unbroken by time. Yet on this morning, that fragile sense of normality begins to shift. Word travels first in whispers. A carriage has been seen approaching from the distant road, an unfamiliar silhouette drawing nearer. The staff at the gates pause, unsure of what they see. The wheels grind slowly over gravel, the horses stamping against the crisp air. And when the door creaks open, a figure steps out, his face worn by years, his eyes carrying storms of memory. Yet there is no mistaking who he is. The man believed to be dead now stands at the gates of Downton Abbey. For a moment, silence reigns, as if the entire estate itself holds its breath. Those who glimpse him feel a chill run deeper than winter frost. Some step back in disbelief. Others clutch at their aprons or coats as though grounding themselves against a vision that should be impossible. One name hovers on every tongue, yet no one dares speak it too quickly for fear that uttering it aloud might break the thin line between reality and ghost. The family is summoned at once. The Earl walks with measured steps, though his hands tremble just enough to betray the storm within. The Countess follows, her heart pounding louder than the echo of her heels. The daughters gather, each with their own secret memories of the man, each with questions that burn like fire in their minds. The grand doors open, and there he is, standing tall yet shadowed by time. His presence swallows the room. The air grows heavier, not with grief this time but with shock. No one rushes forward. There are no embraces, at least not yet. Instead, there is silence as thick as stone. What words can be spoken when faced with the impossible? How do you ask a man why he stands before you when you buried him years ago? At last, it is the Earl who breaks the silence. His voice, low, uncertain, sharp, with a pain he thought buried. "Who are you?" Man lifts his gaze steady, unflinching. He speaks his name, and in that moment, the walls of Downton shake. Not with bricks or mortar, but with memory. Every letter of his voice is a hammer against the truth they had built. Every syllable a crack in the foundation of what they thought they knew. The servants in the shadows cross themselves, some whispering prayers, others staring wide-eyed. His return is not only shocking, it is unnatural. It feels as though time itself has played a cruel trick, but questions burn hotter than any fire. Why now? Why step back into the world after so many years? What secrets hide behind his weathered face? And what price will Downton pay for his return? The answers remain hidden for now, locked behind his unreadable eyes. But one truth is already clear. His presence changes everything. His return should have been a miracle. Yet the longer he stood within the walls of Downton Abbey, the less it felt like a blessing, and the more it resembled a riddle. It was not simply that he lived when the world believed him dead. It was the timing. The question of why, after all these years, why in this very moment he chose to emerge from shadows, became the heartbeat of every whisper within the estate. Some believed it was destiny, that fate had held him in silence until Downton itself stood at a turning point. Perhaps the house called him back in its hour of need. Perhaps unseen forces tied his story to the great halls, forever binding him to its future. Others spoke of revenge for the dead. Do not walk among the living unless unfinished business pulls them from their graves. What promises had he left unkept? What betrayals did he carry like stones in his chest? There were darker theories too. Whispers in the servant halls suggested he had not returned of his own will, but been driven back. Perhaps debts bound him, chains forged in secret years. Perhaps powerful enemies hunted him, and Downton would soon feel their shadow. Was his arrival a shield for the family or a spark for a fire that could consume them all? Then there was the simplest yet sharpest question. Had he ever truly died at all? If he had survived, then why vanish? Why force his family into mourning? Why watch from afar as his name was carved in memory and grief cloaked the house like black veils? The cruelty of such silence seemed sharper than any grave. If he lived, then his absence was not just mystery. It was betrayal, and betrayal at Downton cuts deeper than blood. As the hours stretched into days, his presence grew heavier than absence ever had. He offered no easy answers. His smile, when it came, was thin. His words clipped, chosen with care. He spoke of journeys, yet gave no map. He spoke of loss, yet named no faces it. was as though he had lived an entire lifetime hidden between the lines of history, and now those pages threatened to spill into the Abbey's polished floors. Every night the family gathered not in celebration, but in uneasy silence. They studied him like a puzzle, each piece jagged, refusing to fit. The daughters wondered if he returned to protect them or to claim what once was his. The Earl feared he sought inheritance. The Countess feared he sought forgiveness. The staff feared most of all, for the lives of those above had always shaped the lives below, and the return of the dead promised storms none of them could avoid. So why now? Why here? Why, after the house had learned to live without him, did he choose to return? No answer came, only the promise of more questions. But one truth gnawed at them all. His return was not chance. His reappearance was not kindness. It was purpose. And that purpose remained locked in silence, waiting for the moment to break. The Abbey had always been a house of balance. Each person knew their place, from the gilded halls above to the stone kitchens below. But his return was a stone cast into still waters, and the ripples reached everyone. Whether they admitted it or not, the Abbey itself felt different, the very air heavier, as though the walls had absorbed his presence. At the great dining table the family sat together, but the mood was fractured. The Earl, whose voice once commanded with certainty, now measured every word against suspicion. His fork rested longer between bites, his gaze lingering on the man who had once been his ally, and perhaps his greatest rival. The Countess, whose strength had carried the family through wars and scandals, found herself searching his face for answers. Her eyes clouded with the ache of both love and doubt. She wanted to believe, yet fear told her believing could shatter her. The daughters felt the change in sharper ways. Each carried their own history with him, memories that tugged at their hearts like threads, unraveling old dresses. For one, he had been a mentor, a figure of guidance. For another, he had been the object of secret affections whispered to no one. For the youngest, he was a ghost of stories told by others, returned now in flesh to disrupt the innocence she had wrapped around his memory. Their unity as sisters now bent under the strain of deciding whether he was salvation or threat. Below stairs, the servants spoke more freely. Their world had always been tied to the fortunes of the family, and so his reappearance meant uncertainty for them all. Carson polished silver with more force than needed muttering. Under his breath, Mrs. Hughes tried to calm the staff, reminding them that whispers only fueled fear, but even she could not hide her unease. For if the family quaked, then the house itself trembled, and servants were always the first to feel the cracks even. The villagers sensed the shift. They gathered in the inns and on the cobbled lanes, speaking in half-hushed tones about the man who had returned from the dead. Some feared he would bring scandal. Others whispered he might be a savior come to restore fortunes long diminished. Whatever their belief, one truth bound them together. Downton Abbey was once again at the heart of a story larger than any of them could control. And so the Abbey became a house divided. Some wished to welcome him. Others wished to cast him out. But no matter their stance, none could ignore him. He was no longer just a figure from the past. He was the question that loomed over every breakfast, every glance, every heartbeat. And the unspoken fear that haunted them all was this: his return would not simply change Downton Abbey. It might destroy it. What happens within Downton Abbey rarely stays contained within its walls. For centuries, the house had been more than a home. It was a symbol of order, a testament to tradition, standing against the restless march of time. His return threatened not only the family's peace, but the very balance that kept Downton alive. The Earl understood this better than most. He had spent his life defending the estate against wars, financial storms, and political winds. Yet this was different. This was not a threat that arrived on paper or in Parliament. This was a man of flesh and blood carrying secrets the Abbey could not measure or prepare for. If he claimed his place again, where would that leave those who had stepped forward in his absence? If he brought debts or dangers from the world beyond, what shield could the abbey raise? The Countess saw the return through another lens. She knew Downton thrived not only on its land but on its story. A house such as theirs survived by reputation, by whispers in drawing rooms and the respect of peers. What tale would the world weave when it learned a man once declared dead had risen to walk its halls again? Would they call it a miracle or a scandal? Would they see Downton as blessed or cursed for the daughters? The bigger picture was even more personal. His return threatened to tilt the fragile path of their futures. Marriage alliances delicate as glass could shatter under the weight. Of his reappearance, suitors might withdraw, inheritances might be questioned, reputations might darken. And yet beneath the danger was a cruel temptation. What if his presence offered answers to the questions they had buried? What if he was not only a threat, but the missing key to their own destinies? Even the servants sensed that this was no ordinary homecoming. A butler could read the rise and fall of a dynasty in the tone of dinner conversation. A maid could sense danger in the silence of footsteps. They understood better than anyone that if the abbey faltered, their lives would falter too. His return tied them to a storm whose size they could not yet see. Beyond the gates, the world itself was changing. The old ways crumbled as machines, and factories rose. Society no longer bowed so easily to titles or estates. For Downton to endure, it needed certainty and strength, not the chaos of a man who stepped out of the grave. His return arrived at the worst of times, when the abbey could least afford distraction. Yet perhaps that was why fate had chosen now. Perhaps the question of Downton's survival was not only about bricks and inheritance, but about whether the past could still command the present. In the bigger picture, his return was more than a family drama. It was a test of loyalty, of blood, of tradition itself. And as every candle burned late into the night, one truth pressed heavier with every passing hour. This was not merely a man reclaiming his life. This was a reckoning. The first days of his return were filled with silence. But silence at Downton Abbey never lasts long. Secrets have a way of seeping through walls, carried by whispers in corridors and glances across candlelit tables. The family tried to mask their unease, but the house itself betrayed them. Servants exchanged knowing looks. Villagers pressed their ears for news, and soon every soul tied to Downton felt the weight of a question too large to ignore. Who was he now, and what had he brought back with him? The Earl demanded answers. He sought them in private conversations behind closed doors. His voice clipped his questions sharp, yet the man gave little in return. He spoke of distant lands, but never named them. He spoke of hardship, but gave no proof. He told of journeys, but left out destinations. It was as though he had woven a tale carefully crafted to keep the truth just out of reach. And with every withheld detail, suspicion grew like ivy wrapping around the abbey's stone heart. The Countess tried another way. She reached not with questions, but with memory. She recalled evenings long ago when his laughter filled the halls. She reminded him of bonds forged in joy and sorrow. But the man before her now was not the same. His smile was a ghost of what it once had been. His eyes shadowed by experiences no one could touch. She began to wonder if the person who had returned was truly the man they lost, or a stranger who wore his face. The daughters each searched for truth. In their own way, one studied him like a puzzle, believing she could piece together the hidden story. Another tried to draw out confession through kindness, waiting for his guard to lower. The youngest lingered at doorways, watching silently, too young to question but old enough to sense danger. Each of them felt a fracture forming between memory and reality, between the man they once knew and the figure now seated at their table. And still the servants watched. From the kitchen to the stables, their theories multiplied. Carson swore he recognized lies in the man's voice. Mrs. Hughes warned the staff to hold their tongues. Daisy whispered that perhaps he had never died at all, that the funeral was a lie. The Abbey had always thrived on whispers, but now those whispers grew louder until even the walls seemed to hum with suspicion. Every night grew heavier. Shadows lengthened across the corridors, and the house seemed restless. The man carried himself as if waiting for something or someone. He avoided certain rooms, his eyes flickering to portraits too quickly, his steps halting near locked doors. He was not only hiding secrets, he was living among them, and soon those secrets would not remain hidden for long, for the truth was closing. In Downton Abbey could not hold mysteries forever. The weight of his return pressed too hard, and cracks were beginning to show. In those cracks lay fragments of revelation, fragments sharp enough to wound. And though no one yet knew the whole story, they all felt it approaching. The truth would come, and when it did, Downton Abbey would never be the same again. The truth cannot be delayed forever. At Downton Abbey, the walls that once held silence now trembled with the weight of revelation. The man who had returned from the grave could no longer hide in shadows. His presence had already torn open wounds. His silence had already fed suspicion. And so the reckoning began, not with thunder, not with fire, but with a single moment of confrontation. Happened one evening when the family gathered in the drawing room. The lamps flickered their glow, casting long shadows across polished floors. A storm raged outside as if nature itself demanded answers. The Earl stood tall, though his hands shook. At his sides, he had lived with questions long enough, and his patience had withered. The Countess sat nearby, her eyes sharp with fear and longing. The daughters lingered close, each carrying their own unspoken hope and dread. The servants waited at the edges of the room, silent witnesses to history unfolding. The Earl's voice broke the stillness. His words cut clean through the air. "Tell us why now. Tell us why you let us bury you. Tell us why you returned at this hour when the world has already moved on." The questions hung like daggers, every word echoing against the storm. The man did not falter. He met their eyes one by one. His silence stretched, and in that silence, the room seemed to shrink tighter, until every heart pounded in unison. Then, at last he spoke. His voice low, steady, threaded with pain. "You were never meant to know. You were never meant to see me again. But times have changed, and secrets can no longer be kept." His words struck like lightning. The Countess gasped, her hand trembling against her chest. The daughters leaned forward, their eyes wide with fear and disbelief. The Earl's face darkened with anger and desperation. "What secret, what truth have you carried all these years?" But before he could answer, the storm outside broke. With a violent crash, the windows rattled, the lamps flickered, and in that chaos, his final words spilled out like a curse. "I did not return for you, I returned, because what follows me will not wait."